Picture this, you're buckled into a stealth fighter, and in just 2 seconds, an electromagnetic system catapults you off the carrier deck at 150 knots. No old school steam, just smooth, high-tech power. That's China's new Fujian carrier, and it's not just shaking things up. It's a seismic shift that could tip the balance of power in the Pacific, redrawing global alliances and forcing the US Navy to rethink everything, from Taiwan to the South China Sea. In this video today, we'll break down last month's catapult tests in China. So let's start with some quick background. China didn't waste time building carriers. They took the old Liang, it was refitted from a Ukrainian hull, then they built the Shandong from scratch. But the Fujian, that new carrier we just talked about, that's their big step up. The first one with real catapults. So instead of those ski jump style ramps, I mean, who doesn't like a ski jump ramp, but not on an aircraft carrier, please? She hit the water in 2022, 80,000 tons, over 1,000 feet long, and it packed 3 EMALS, electromagnetic aircraft launch systems. That's your first acronym. You're welcome. These things launch planes like a railgun. They are very consistent from what we've seen so far. And now you compare that to the steam catapults on the US Nimitz class carriers. Those are loud, they're thirsty for energy, and they might be a bit of a pain to maintain, but they are very reliable. At this point, naval power has proven to be much more dominant than China's power, but they're nipping at our heels. And that EMALS in China, it seems to be quiet relatively. It pulls power straight from the ship's grid for about 40 launches or so a day. So basically it turns a carrier from a basic flight deck into a full-blown super carrier hub for China, as far as China is concerned. The Fujian's got that flat deck for takeoffs and landings at the same time, though early plans had a glitch where the EMALS strips overlapped the runway a bit. But China tweaked it, and even though clearly they are far behind the US, this is a sign that now they are that annoying chihuahua that is nipping at the heels of the US Navy. So let's zoom in on what went down in 2025, something that has a lot of people talking about. It was on the 22nd of September. China's state media hit us with videos and pics from the Fujian's 9th sea trial that was right in the Taiwan Strait. So if that wasn't a FU, I don't know what is. And the first thing of note is that a J-15T fighter, are they just stealing pretty much all of our names for fighters? Why couldn't they call it like a J-37? Something that's not in the US inventory, guys. Really? J-35, J-15? At this point, they're just rubbing salt in the wound. But that fighter variant blasted down the track. It hit about 165 knots, and then comes the highlight, which is their focus. This is what China really wants to project naval air power with, and that's the J-35. Their version of a stealth fighter. I've got some videos on that if you want to know how stealthy that thing actually is. But the edges and semi-radar proof curves on that thing show that it is likely a little bit more stealthy than most of China's fighters. But it rocketed off and it vanished into the blue. And China, always willing to bring fireworks, didn't stop there. The KJ-600, that's an early warning plane that joined in. And this was a little bit different because some of the testing that China has done in the past has been in harbors. This one wasn't in a safe harbor. It was in the Taiwan Strait. So again, China's like, yeah, we're going to sail around and find out. So the internet is basically saying that the Fujian is on track for commissioning next year. And that means that China will have about 3 carriers ready to roll by 2027. So picture this, sortie rates could potentially double from what we've seen so far from China. So that means they could pump out roughly 50 planes an hour. And that's a swarm that you really can't ignore. If it's 50 planes an hour, you've actually got a sizable naval force on your hands. It's nothing that the US Navy can't deal with, but it is an upgrade from what we've seen before in China. So let's dive a little bit into the tech. So tech-wise, it runs on what's called a linear induction motor. And with that much torque, that's what gives the jets the ability to get down the deck as fast as possible. China is claiming that it's 30% more efficient than steam, and it can handle bigger birds, so bigger aircraft can actually launch off the carrier. And it hooks into the ship's power setup, which is something that China is bragging about as well. The US has 11 super carriers, and we've been doing it for decades, but it looks like China is getting long in the tooth, as they like to say. So the Fujian is basically proof that China is focusing more on their Navy and they want to have that naval power projection. Although to compete with the US, I mean, we're talking decades, but this is something to think about when it comes to the potential conflict in the Taiwan Straits. But now let's talk about the plane that actually makes that Fujian tick and why this is all to do in China. Well, all the muckety-mucks in China are actually talking about this carrier. Meet that J-35. That's China's latest carrier fighter, and they're hyping it as a stealth machine, and it's a shot at the F-35. Again, again, you guys are just showing off at this point. You're basically like, yeah, we can name our fighters exactly the same as yours, just change one letter, and you really can't do anything about it. But I guess they're right there. But the big thing is we got to pump the brakes a little bit, because those stealth claims are pretty bold coming out of Beijing without an independent verification. We're talking about more of a trust me bro stealth model from China, but it is an upgrade over their older stuff. The J-15, the J-16, those jets are definitely not on ghost mode, but this new J-35, it doesn't seem like a slouch to me, but I would put it in a similar category as like the Su-57. It's got twin engines, which makes it likely more reliable for a sea-based aircraft, and it's potentially got a lower radar profile than what past designs have been in China, but likely not from every angle, especially from the rear quadrant. When you look at the engines on this thing, these things are going to stand out like a you-know-what in sweatpants. Everybody in the room is just going to have that jaw-dropping moment, and they're not going to be able to stop looking as you see those engines from the back just light up your radar screen. Some quick specs on that thing is it tops out at about Mach 2.0. It can fly about 600 miles as a combat radius, and it's claimed to have an ASA radar, which is an active electronically scanned array radar, your second acronym. That radar is claimed to be able to spot you first, but we don't know the exact capabilities of China's radars themselves. And those September clips that we saw, it shows it meshing relatively well with that EMALS, so that's definitely progress for China, showing that they have a stealth-ish jet that can actually get airborne from the sea. That is an improvement on what we've seen in the past. And then for some context, China is claiming that the J-35 has a smaller radar cross-section than the human hand. So I don't know. I think someone's probably just about to get you-know-what slapped. So I would take that with a grain of salt until we actually see some real tests on their radar cross-section. It does look to have some nice hidden bays under there that could carry the PL-15 missile. The PL-15 missile does have some long legs. Looks like on paper it does have longer legs than the AIM-120 missile, but it is interesting that we're not seeing the J-20 on these carriers, and it's likely because the size of the J-20 just makes it a little too large of a jet to be feasible on that EMALS. So even though the ship is likely more capable than what China has seen before, the J-20, I think at this point, is just not going to be capable of launching off of that thing unless there's some adaptations that are made to that EMALS to get a jet that large off of the deck. But hey, it remains to be seen. We could all be surprised. So the J-35 is what's flying off this carrier instead of the J-20. To me, that's kind of like the J-20's little younger naval compact cousin. That smaller frame guy that you have crawl into small spaces when you need to crawl into small spaces. But the J-35 borrows that 5th gen vibe for sure, and likely it does have the same radar tech as the J-20, both of those likely having the ASA radar, and it's claimed that the J-20 can supercruise. J-35 still remains to be seen whether that thing can supercruise or not. But how would this thing stack up? The J-35 blasting off of a carrier on the outskirts of the South China Sea, somewhere near the Straits, what would that look like going up against an F-35? So those RCS numbers, if they hold up, that might be able to compete with what the F-35 could be bringing to the fight as well. But the F-35 is battle tested, and it has the sensor fusion that basically makes the Chinese pilots shake in their boots. The situational awareness that comes from the different SA enhancing systems on the F-35 allow it to basically use infrared tracking, and then overall just give it an ultimately clear picture of what's going on the battle space, not only syncing in with other air assets, but syncing in with sea assets, land assets, space assets. Can't leave out the Space Force. Don't worry, Space Force, I love you. And the F-35's got years of data operating at sea. The Chinese don't have that yet. China's got their prototypes rolling though, and so we can't look past them. You can't think that they're an easy day. And the KJ-600, that might be one of their biggest advancements because it's essentially an E-2 Hawkeye. It's got some sort of wraparound sensors on that thing that are trying to pull data from other sources. We don't know exactly where that is yet, but likely if I was a betting man, China would likely want those to pull information from drones, their version of the CCA, the Combat Collaborative Aircraft. That's what China would want their airborne early warning control system over the sea sucking in information from and then spitting that back out to their fighters, so then their fighters might have somewhat of a fighting chance up against the F-35. Kind of how the F-35 is a all-in-one solution. It's the triple threat. It's got everything. When it comes to the J-35, they're probably going to rely on off-board sensors, off-board radars to try to get the same type of situational awareness that the F-35 has. But likely here's the advancement that China is really proud of and is a bit of of a factor. It allows China to push out potential air power to somewhere around 1,000 miles or so offshore, depending on the real capabilities of this ship. So that means no more sticking as close to home as what we've seen in the past. So likely this ship is going to be like their version of like beer muscles, where they think they can kind of do anything and you really can't. Everybody knows that guy. If you don't know that guy, then maybe you are that guy. But yeah, so it essentially is going to encourage them to try to depart and go further away from their coastline and try to exert force and exert power throughout the South China Sea. So the real threat, while it might not be to Taiwan from this carrier, it's probably going to be to some of the outposts and the islands from other partner nations with the US. Think about the Philippines, Indonesia, countries that don't want China mucking around on their outposts. But at this point, China is basically saying, yeah, we're coming and there's nothing you can do about it. But coming from an F-16 and an F-15E background myself, I would definitely love to see the capabilities of the F-35. There's been some air shows. I've done a few videos on those. But really, when it comes to the maneuverability, it looks like no thrust vectoring on that jet. So an F-16 launching from some land-based solution in the area, but definitely the F-18. The F-18's ability to fight at low speeds, use the AIM-9X, that's going to be some bread and butter going up against the J-35. So to me, one of the best matchups going up against the J-35 is likely going to be the F-35, of course, but also the F-18, which would be in the South China Sea as well. And that would be a duel that I think would be relatively an even matchup. But then you throw in the ability of that F-18 pilot to have years of experience operating in combat at sea, and the edge to me definitely goes to the F-18 pilot. And then as a part of this air power advancement at the sea, China's also releasing some images of their new blended wing cargo aircraft. So when it comes to logistics, getting all the parts you need for jets, making sure everything is operating at the base you're at, it really comes down to logistics. Logistics is huge. All you loggies out there know what I'm talking about. But this thing does look relatively large. The body and wings blend into the jet, so it's kind of one huge lift machine. But why do we really care about that? Well, when it comes to the wings blending in more smoothly, that's going to give you 20 to 30% more efficiency potentially over clunky cargo haulers from the past that we've seen come out of China. And then likely they're going to focus on making this very efficient so they can cover large swaths of the South China Sea. Because if you want to resupply the carrier, let's say it gets 1,000 miles off the coast, then you'd want to land this cargo plane or do some sort of an airdrop near the carrier, but way further out than they've done before. So to me, that's kind of why they've done this. It's essentially like you go on a road trip and you're driving cross country and then you hire a people moving drone from Joby to drop you party supplies. Pretty much the exact same thing. And it looks like they're trying to make this thing relatively sleek to avoid defenses, and they know that there are radar nets, there's SAM nets out there from the Navy, from other partner nations with the US. So they want this to be a little more tactical than your average everyday cargo plane. So that's why we see that blended wing line on this thing. So to China, this new plane isn't just about moving boxes. They're not the glorified FedEx or UPS of the South China Sea, although that'd be pretty awesome if they got a side hustle and started delivering packages in a stealthy looking cargo jet. I would be all for that. China, if you're listening, please do that. But basically they're trying to own the long game and resupply their different outposts and potentially resupply this new carrier if it has the legs that they say it does. So now let's connect the dots to Taiwan, that chip making powerhouse out there in the middle of the ocean, alone and unafraid, churning out chips. We appreciate you doing that. But China's got its eyes on that thing. Of course, it's the apple of their eye at this point. In October, the island was harassed by Chinese Coast Guard vessels, and ultimately China is moving their military exercises closer and closer to Taiwan, basically saying, hey, what are you going to do about it? China's also doing a lot of drills for beach assaults. They've got drone defenses set up. They're even getting Mr. Deeds sneaky.
I fear you're underestimating the sneakiness, sir.
With stuff like cyber hits and then fishing vessels that look like normal fishing vessels, and then all of a sudden they break out into a full-on boat swarm that tries to attack a pretend target to show and basically try to intimidate the people of Taiwan. So again, the big thing for China with the Fujian carrier and the J-35s, they're essentially trying to intimidate and show Taiwan that, hey, we can do this and we're right at your doorstep. And also something that they're probably trying to hint at is some sort of a lockdown or a blockade. And if you have a carrier, that's one of the better ways to do that. It's definitely a big part of a blockade. And then those stealth jets flying around, they're basically showing, hey, there's no way out and you might as well give up. So they're basically trying to intimidate Taiwan. To what end? I would say it's more for a long game type scenario where they do this for decades to come, and then eventually one day they try to take Taiwan. Okay, let's talk about how this could actually go hot with a hypothetical situation. They're definitely what ifs, but I'm thinking through this from a military perspective. So the straits could potentially get attacked by China in, let's say, 2028. China just one day flips the switch and their Fujian carrier is kind of leading the pack. Their EMALS are blasting off potentially up to 40 J-35s a day. The KJ-600s, those are trying to light up any type of enemy assets in the area. And then their cargo planes are airdropping in troops. So they're actually using those cargo planes to airdrop in potentially 10,000 troops in a day. And that's likely also why those cargo planes have the stealth signatures that they do, so they can avoid some sort of surface-to-air missile threat and actually get those troops onto the mainland part of Taiwan. The US would likely throw in something like the Reagan Carrier Strike Group. F-35s would scramble in a methodical fashion, but here's the thing they would be dealing with: sheer volume from China when it comes to them jamming comms and then launching drones. They would probably try to launch thousands of drones to try to keep the F-35s occupied. At this point, it would likely end in some sort of a draw. The US Navy is very prepared for that drone swarm type tactic that China has been using. I mean, you can see it at all their celebrations. They're basically sitting there saying, yeah, it's Chinese New Year, but this is exactly how we would attack Taiwan. Don't worry about that. But the geopolitical part of this is that this war would actually slow down ships to the entire world, but China doesn't necessarily care about that, because in their mind, they're likely thinking, well, we'll just take over all the chips, and then here in a few years, we'll crank it back up again, and then everybody has to buy it from us. That's kind of China's MO. In my opinion, the US Navy would definitely grab air superiority eventually, but at what cost? But when you team up the Navy, the Air Force, you've got F-22s in the area, swaths of F-35s, we would definitely make sure that China never forgot that day. So there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed that update on the Fujian. Seeing China make progress is definitely nothing to discount. Never discount the enemy. Remember, always make Sun Tzu proud, and always think about what the enemy could be doing, where they're going. My opinion is they're definitely behind the US Navy, but they're close on the heels, chipping away, trying to do everything they can to copy the innovation of the Navy, to copy the innovation of the Air Force, and they're doing that with their new Fujian carrier. What do you guys think? What do you think this means for the South China Sea conflict? Let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear what you have to say. Hope you enjoyed the new studio. It's up and running. I'll make a few updates here as we go, but I'm really enjoying it. Hope you guys are as well. And hey, as always, if you would, please watch this video right here. When you watch this video right here, it helps the channel grow like crazy, and I would greatly appreciate it. So I'll see you on this video right here. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing off.